Sandwiched between a sister responsible for sex appeal and another meant to inspire protectiveness, a plain girl introduces her predicament. Guests chatter elegantly at a grand, opulent society gathering. Amidst the lively atmosphere, the second daughter glares with a strained, utterly unimpressed expression. The room's attention fixates intensely on a breathtakingly beautiful woman, with onlookers endlessly praising her incredibly amazing figure. The captivated nobles immediately identify the stunning woman as Lady Corinne, the highly revered eldest daughter of the prestigious Viscount Corinne. Murmurs ripple through the elegant hall as guests spot the angelic third daughter, Lady Juliana, gracing the gathering with her undeniable presence. Standing quietly in the shadows, the plain girl narrates her painful reality, acknowledging that her older sister is entirely in charge of captivating the room with irresistible sex appeal. She bitterly notes that her younger sister is constantly fawned over for being an absolute angel, showered with compliments about how lovely and exceptionally cute she apparently is. With a heavy, exhausted gaze, the middle sister admits that these two flawlessly attractive siblings constitute her absolute biggest complex. Cruel whispers pierce the atmosphere as gossiping nobles openly mock the second daughter for lacking any glamour, deeming the conspicuously plain-looking girl to be utterly average. Accepting the harsh aristocratic mockery without a fight, she somberly confirms that she is indeed that extraordinarily ordinary girl. She resigns herself to her tragic fate, viewing herself as nothing more than a plain woman hopelessly caught between sisters who effortlessly and endlessly attract everyone's adoration. The scene abruptly shifts as the plain girl, now wearing a striking school uniform, sprints frantically across the academy grounds while gasping heavily for air. Panicking as she runs, she desperately wonders what she should do, fully aware that the crucial entrance ceremony is just about to start. She realizes Lady Corinne completely forgot about guiding her because her older sister was instantly surrounded by fawning acquaintances. Frustrated, she deduces her sister was so unbelievably busy absorbing flattering compliments that she carelessly provided the wrong directions. Panting heavily in exhaustion, she complains that she faithfully followed the given path but sees absolutely no sign of any guidance to her destination. A bead of sweat drips down her face as the overwhelming stress of her desperate situation finally begins to crush her resolve. The hurtful memory of someone cruelly pointing out that she doesn't resemble the exceptionally beautiful Lady Corinne echoes painfully in her mind. Sprinting blindly, she laments being completely lost at her new academy, wishing her popular sister could have bothered to look after her just for the entrance ceremony. Fighting back tears of anxiety, she desperately wants to ask for directions but finds the area completely deserted, leaving her terrified that she won't make it in time. Relief violently washes over her as she finally spots a solitary person resting quietly in the distance. Approaching a shaded park bench, she cautiously discovers a young man napping peacefully with an open book casually draped over his face. Observing his dark attire, she quickly wonders if his striking black uniform signifies that he belongs to the royal palace's elite Second Knight Order. She nervously stands over the sleeping knight, studying the thick volume resting heavily over his eyes to block out the harsh sunlight. Gathering every ounce of her timid courage, she urgently calls out to him, begging the stranger to excuse her sudden intrusion. Apologizing profusely for disturbing his rest, she desperately asks him how to navigate toward the Knight Department Hall. She clenches her fists anxiously, holding her breath while she waits for the mysterious sleeping student to react to her frantic plea. The imposing stranger slowly sits up, sluggishly questioning the current time while clearly annoyed by the sudden interruption. Her eyes widen in absolute astonishment as the heavy book slides away to fully reveal the young stranger's face. The young knight unveils a ruggedly handsome countenance, his sharp features illuminated beautifully by the soft daylight. She is instantly captivated by his stunning features, completely mesmerized by his deep blue eyes that perfectly mirror the boundless open sky. When he bluntly asks if she is just a lost child, she bashfully admits her predicament and begs him to point her toward the ceremony. Stepping forward powerfully in his dark, laced boots, the knight curtly instructs the flustered girl to follow him. Glancing back with an unbothered, stoic expression, he silently wonders about the true identity of the frantic girl trailing behind him. The plain girl hurriedly follows the tall, imposing knight, completely dwarfed by his dark uniform as he confidently leads her through the grand academy courtyards. A massive wave of relief visibly washes over her weary face as her suffocating anxiety finally begins to melt away. Stopping at the edge of the courtyard, the knight extends his hand and points directly to the towering entrance of her destination. Bowing deeply in immense gratitude, She thanks him profusely while he practically urges her to hurry because time is almost up. Suddenly pausing in his tracks, the young knight remembers something important before she can completely run away. Blissfully unaware of his lingering gaze, she smiles radiantly, thrilled by the comforting thought that she will finally make it in time. Hesitating slightly, the stoic knight politely interrupts her departure, softly asking if she wouldn't mind giving him her name. Her pupil shrinks in extreme shock, completely paralyzed by the astonishing reality that someone actually wants to know her identity. A significant amount of time quickly passes, dramatically shifting the story forward. A cheerful voice suddenly calls out for Clifford, warmly greeting the plain girl, now revealed to be named Fabiola. Fabiola's face instantly lights up with an incredibly bright, joyful smile as she stands happily amongst the towering bookshelves. Clifford gently explains that he came to gather books on economics and law, curiously asking Fabiola what she intends to borrow today. Beaming with irrepressible joy, Fabiola thinks to herself that her absolute greatest pleasure is simply getting the chance to see him again today. She affectionately reflects on their blossoming bond, cherishing this shared time as an incredibly precious treasure. Revealing a newfound confidence, Fabiola enthusiastically recommends a beginner-friendly law book to Clifford, genuinely relishing the profound happiness of their shared moment. Fabiola is consumed by the bittersweet realization that there is not much time left for her to share precious moments with a distinguished third-year student like him. Startling her out of her deep thoughts, Clifford unexpectedly approaches and warmly points out what a delightful coincidence it is to run into her, casually asking if she is currently heading home. Completely caught off guard by his sudden presence, a heavily flustered Fabiola nervously stammers in agreement. Desperately determined not to let this golden opportunity slip through her fingers, Fabiola internally cheers herself on, aggressively urging her anxious heart to gather some courage because this is finally her chance to make a move. Gazing longingly at the handsome knight, she silently and fervently wishes that they could somehow overcome their boundaries and become closer to one another. The heavy, romantic tension is suddenly broken when Clifford softly and affectionately calls out her name. Beaming with a warm, inviting smile, Clifford happily points out that since they share such remarkably similar tastes in books, he would genuinely love to spend more time hearing her personal thoughts on literature. Mustering every ounce of her fleeting bravery and leaning in with a shy, hopeful blush, a highly flustered Fabiola boldly asks the young knight if he would like to walk together for part of the way back. Smiling charmingly and bringing a finger to his lips in a playful, secretive gesture, Clifford presents a small, beautifully tied gift bag, warmly explaining that it is a special thank you present for her helpful guidance the other day. Demonstrating his impeccable chivalry and deeply observant nature, the considerate knight quickly notices her struggling, pointing out that her bags look uncomfortably heavy and immediately offering to carry them for her. Overwhelmed by his continuous, attentive kindness, Fabiola cradles her flushed cheeks in absolute bliss, blushing furiously as the tender, echoing sound of him repeatedly saying her name fills her wildly beating heart. Lost in a euphoric daydream of adolescent romance, she happily reflects on their blossoming relationship, joyfully convincing herself that lately, she and her beloved senpai seem to be pretty good together. Suddenly snapping out of her romantic trance with a sharp jolt of self-awareness, she frantically questions her own incredibly bold thoughts, wondering what on earth she is even thinking by getting her hopes up so high. However, she quickly begins to rationalize her deepening infatuation, convincing her anxious mind that since it is her respectable senpai, his prestigious family background would not be a problem and her strict parents certainly would not complain about the match. The narrative shifts backward to a quiet moment at the academy library, where Fabiola happily greets her senpai at the circulation desk, while Clifford casually wonders if a specific book he previously mentioned has been returned to the stacks yet. The serene, scholarly atmosphere of the Grand Academy Library stretches out comfortably around them, heavily characterized by towering, meticulously organized bookshelves stacked tightly with thick academic texts. Fabiola's eye violently widens in a dramatic, heart-stopping moment of absolute shock as she suddenly registers a highly unexpected and devastatingly familiar presence intruding upon their quiet sanctuary. Oblivious to the impending doom, Fabiola enthusiastically explains to her senpai that she had thoughtfully anticipated he would want to borrow the text, so she deliberately set it aside for him. Suddenly, a sharp, familiar voice brutally interrupts the tender interaction by calling out her casual nickname, Fabi. Fabiola gasps softly in genuine surprise, uttering her senpai's title as the interrupting voice cheerfully and seamlessly asks Fabi to introduce the handsome, unfamiliar gentleman standing right beside her. The stunningly beautiful Lady Corinne chuckles gracefully, explaining that she knew Fabi was on library duty today and simply came by to see her face. Meanwhile, a completely horrified Fabiola stares in absolute dread, crying out for her older sister as her peaceful world shatters. Standing mere feet away, the young knight Clifford is visibly stunned into complete silence, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated awe as he gazes upon the breathtakingly unexpected arrival of the elder sister. Lady Corinne stands radiantly triumphant before them, her dark hair cascading perfectly as her mesmerizing beauty and undeniable, effortless charm instantly and thoroughly command the absolute attention of the entire room. Fabiola instantly lowers her gaze with a heartbreaking, intensely painful expression of pure defeat, the vibrant light of hope completely fading from her eyes as she quickly realizes exactly what tragic narrative is about to unfold. As Clifford and Corinne inevitably lock eyes, a devastated Fabiola tragically notes that the unmistakable, metaphorical bells of two destined people falling deeply in love are ringing loud and clear in the suffocating silence. Crushed by a lifetime of living in shadows, she bitterly and fully accepts this inevitable, agonizing outcome, openly acknowledging that there is absolutely no man alive who would not instantly and helplessly fall for her perfect sister's enchanting smile. Forced into the humiliating role of a mere stepping stone, Fabiola awkwardly explains that she and Lord Clifford Sanchez only started talking because of her library duty, dutifully noting to Corinne that the prestigious knight is actually in the same academic year as her sister. Staring blankly at Clifford's completely mesmerized and love-struck face, Fabiola solemnly confesses that she has always been mercilessly forced to watch this exact heartbreaking scenario play out from the lonely sidelines. A deeply painful, burning sense of inescapable inferiority consumes her soul as she desperately and quietly wonders why they are so fundamentally, cruelly different despite being blood sisters raised under the exact same roof. Exploiting the situation perfectly, Corinne coyly mentions she thought Clifford was merely Fabi's friend, while the utterly entranced and breathless knight openly admits he had absolutely no idea such a beautiful and truly wonderful older sister even existed. Completely enraptured by her overwhelming presence, Clifford urgently asks Fabiola to identify the beautiful lady standing before him. Fabiola formally introduces her older sister, Corinne, while Corinne playfully notes that she and Clifford are only meeting for the first time because they are separated into completely different classes. Demonstrating her ruthless social grace, Corinne laughs off any familial comparison by bluntly stating that she and Fabi do not look alike anyway, before politely excusing herself from the knight's presence. Offering a flawlessly fake apology to Fabi for the interruption, Corinne cheerfully bids her devastated sister farewell, promising to see her back at home. Quickly recovering from his love-struck daze, a highly eager Clifford politely and desperately asks Corinne if she would like to walk to her awaiting carriage together. Corinne seamlessly accepts the handsome knight's offer with a graceful smile, replying that she would be absolutely delighted to be escorted by him. The dazzling, perfectly matched new couple gracefully walks away together into the bright light, completely abandoning a devastated, forgotten Fabiola to stand utterly alone amidst the cold, silent library shelves. Hot tears well up endlessly in Fabiola's eyes as she violently mourns her shattered, foolish hopes, revealing that she was desperately planning to finally confess her deeply held romantic feelings to him before the rapidly approaching graduation. The heavy, wooden wheels of an elegant departing carriage clatter loudly and decisively against the academy's stone-paved courtyard, physically signaling the brutal end of her fragile, short-lived romantic dream. The rhythmic, slowly fading sound of the carriage rolling smoothly away echoes tauntingly into the far distance, ruthlessly finalizing her crushing, entirely unpreventable heartbreak. Returning fully to her incredibly somber, defeated narration, Fabiola grimly acknowledges the pattern of her life, noting that ever since she was a very young child, she has been permanently and unfairly stuck playing miserable, thankless supporting roles. Standing entirely alone in the vast, consuming darkness of her own overwhelming despair, the broken girl tearfully admits to herself that this latest, unbelievably cruel theft of her personal happiness is simply far too much for her fragile heart to bear. The grand, imposing, and intricately detailed exterior of the wealthy Viscount's luxurious, multi-story estate looms quietly and indifferently against the beautifully shaded, overcast evening sky. Retreating desperately to the isolated, familiar safety of her private bedroom, a completely emotionally exhausted and entirely defeated Fabiola collapses heavily, face first onto her soft, expansive mattress. Speaking weakly through her closed bedroom door to a highly concerned maid, Fabiola sighs heavily and politely asks to be left entirely alone, promising to call for the servant only once she has finally managed to calm down from her agonizing grief. Burying her tear-stained face deeply and desperately into her plush, comforting pillows, she tightly shuts her eyes in a futile, heartbreaking attempt to completely block out the agonizing, vivid memories of the library encounter. The unfailingly polite, rigorously formal greeting of the dedicated household staff welcoming the young miss back to the estate briefly and quietly surfaces in the turbulent, chaotic sea of her deeply troubled memories. Utterly unable to hold back the overwhelming, violent flood of repressed emotions for a single second longer, the devastated middle sister lets out an anguished groan and completely breaks down into loud, continuous, and heartbreaking sobbing. Attempting to rationalize the profound injustice of her situation, Fabiola bitterly explains that despite her incredibly glamorous appearance, her older sister is actually incredibly inarticulate, possesses absolutely zero genuine social skills, and has almost no real friends of her own. Because of this glaring, massive social deficit, the breathtakingly cruel older sister constantly sticks to Fabiola like a beautiful parasite, effortlessly captivating and permanently stealing away any new, interesting people Fabiola ever manages to become friends with. Deeply traumatized by these repeated betrayals, Fabiola recalls exactly how Corinne would feign innocent ignorance upon meeting Fabi's companions, naturally and ruthlessly slipping her way into the delicate, hard-won relationships Fabiola had already painstakingly built from scratch. The ultimate, unforgivable betrayal cuts the deepest, as a profusely weeping Fabiola freely admits she never once imagined in her wildest nightmares that she would tragically end up unintentionally setting the perfect stage for her glamorous sister's future lovers as well. The agonizing, vivid memory of Clifford affectionately and gently asking her what was wrong violently flashes through her tormented mind, devastating her further because she truly, foolishly believed he had fully intended to confess his own romantic feelings to her that very afternoon. The haunting, effortlessly triumphant and undeniably gorgeous smile of Lady Corinne burns itself permanently into Fabiola's fragile mind, serving as a constant, inescapable reminder of her own agonizingly permanent inferiority. Crying hysterically into the lonely night, Fabiola violently mourns the incredibly foolish delusion that her beloved senpai actually cared for her too, completely heartbroken by the realization that she was merely, temporarily savoring the fleeting good fortune of having ever crossed paths with the noble Lord Clifford. The final, absolute crushing image in her mind is of Clifford's gentle, entirely captivated and deeply romantic smile. A smile directed not at the faithful Fabiola, but solely and completely at the mesmerizing, inescapable beauty of her older sister. Senpai's eyes burned with a fervent, undeniable heat as he gazed lovingly at the narrator's older sister. She could hardly believe her sister had been effortlessly hiding such a remarkable and handsome catch all this time. Standing there in that very place, the narrator realizes her blissfully unaware sister has no idea how incredibly hard she worked to get close to Senpai. Gripping her bedsheets in sheer, helpless frustration, she laments how deeply and painfully unfair the entire situation feels. Her older sister likely believes she was simply lucky to visit the library on a whim, completely oblivious to the heartbreak as she comments on her good fortune in seeing Fabi. Hot tears prickling her eyes, Fabi flatly refuses to let her intense, calculated efforts be casually dismissed as mere luck. Collapsing face down onto her empty bed, she agonizes over why her romantic efforts always end in such heartbreaking, predictable failure. Seeking a small measure of solace in daily routine, Fabi politely gives thanks for her quiet meal. Adjusting her ornate school uniform with trembling hands, a profoundly somber expression completely overtakes Fabi's youthful face. Gazing deeply into the mirror, she reflects on the agonizing few months that have passed since the man she admired, Clifford, had his heart completely stolen by her beautiful older sister. Fabi's eyes widen slightly in surprise as a painfully familiar voice calls out her name from the doorway. Recognizing her sister Corinne's cheerful voice, Fabi notes how these early morning visits have become a frustratingly constant occurrence since the start of her second year. When Fabi pointedly asks if she has another date with Lord Clifford today, Corinne giggles brightly and boasts that he is simply desperate to see her. Looking utterly radiant even while exhausted, Corinne yawns gracefully in her elegant, star-dusted sleepwear. Fabi grimly recalls how Senpai had pursued her older sister relentlessly, culminating in their official, unbreakable engagement by the time he graduated. Hanging her head in utter defeat, Fabi bitterly admits she learned her lesson and never should have fallen for him just because they shared an easy, comfortable rapport. Heavy tears finally spill over as she accepts the harsh, crushing reality that such a grand love was never meant for someone as ordinary as her. Weeping uncontrollably through the long, dark night, she finally bids a painful and definitive goodbye to her very first love. Resolving to permanently shield her broken heart, Fabi decides she must live the rest of her life quietly and without standing out. Morning sunlight washes over the grand, imposing architecture of the prestigious academy as a new, challenging day begins. Pasting on a flawlessly polite facade, Fabi enters the bustling classroom and offers a cheerful good morning to her peers. Halting abruptly in her tracks, a wave of sheer confusion washes over Fabi as she wonders why a student is just standing motionless near the desks. Squinting slightly to see through the morning light, she quickly identifies the frozen girl as Sherry, the elegant daughter of the powerful Marquis's family. Sherry stands completely rigid before a beautifully carved wooden chair, her incredibly long blonde hair cascading heavily down her trembling back. A chilling, volatile mixture of absolute shock and quiet fury intensely darkens Sherry's striking, aristocratic features. Puzzled by the bizarre, tense scene, Fabi wonders exactly why someone of Sherry's immense status would be standing there so helplessly. Fabi's eyes widen in absolute horror as the gruesome, undeniable reality of the situation suddenly registers in her mind. Sherry's desk has been maliciously vandalized, covered entirely in aggressively scribbled notes and completely ruined, torn notebooks. Rushing desperately to the victim's side, Fabi gasps in disbelief and asks who could possibly do something so horribly cruel to a fellow classmate. Panicking visibly, Fabi immediately reaches out to gather the ruined papers, desperate to hide the vicious, humiliating vandalism. Frantically trying to salvage the ruined dignity of her classmate, she insists she must clean it all up before the rest of the class arrives. Before her hands can clear the desk, a voice suddenly cries out from the room, urgently begging her not to touch the ruined items. A classmate firmly advises that they should leave the evidence exactly as it is so a teacher can look at it and let the school handle the official investigation. Trembling with deeply empathetic distress, Fabi stammers that she simply cannot bear to just leave the desk in such a public, disgraceful state. She passionately argues that it would be utterly disgraceful for someone as incredibly noble as her to be seen in such a pitifully bullied state. Hearing Fabi's fierce, unprompted defense, Sherry's intense expression briefly softens into one of genuine, vulnerable surprise. Pressing the vital issue of justice, the other student sharply asks if they don't want to properly punish the unseen culprit. Gripping Sherry's hands reassuringly, Fabi promises to explain everything to the others so the noble girl won't have to worry about the rumors at all. Fabi reflects that their environment is usually quite peaceful, unlike the tense classes filled with pride and jealousy where only the top performers from the first year are gathered. She warmly notes that the students here are all wonderfully sincere, and many treat each other as absolute equals regardless of their noble rank. Because of this profound mutual respect within their ranks, Fabi confidently concludes that the culprit must be from an entirely different class. Realizing the broader, more dangerous implications, she finally agrees that having a teacher step in would undoubtedly lead to a much quicker resolution. As the teacher is quickly briefed, the students explain that Lady Ferreira's desk was already horribly vandalized the exact moment she arrived. The sharp-featured homeroom teacher arrives on the chaotic scene, his eyes wide as he demands to know exactly what happened here. Sitting composed amidst the ruin, Sherry states it is best to involve the headmaster since there is no guarantee others won't fall victim, especially since the brazen culprit even targeted the daughter of a marquis. Taking the severe threat incredibly seriously, the teacher commands them to wait there a moment while he urgently goes to get the headmaster. Breathing a massive, shuddering sigh of relief, Fabi silently gives thanks that they have such a good and incredibly responsive homeroom teacher. Stroking his chin in deep, troubled thought, the teacher gravely agrees that they are absolutely right about the escalating danger. In a shocking, paradigm-shifting internal confession, Fabi realizes she really did something completely outrageous as she thinks deeply about the situation. Staring blankly ahead in a moment of sudden clarity, her mind races wildly as she questions exactly why she acted that way, realizing the dark truth of her own hidden motivations. A dramatic visual montage violently flashes across the scene, centering entirely on Fabiola's sharp, calculating expressions and subtle hints of an impending, unavoidable conflict. A tearful classmate expresses her profound gratitude to Fabiola, utterly bewildered as to why someone would willingly go to such incredibly great lengths for her sake. Fabiola's new companion stares with unadulterated confusion, a distinct question mark seemingly floating above her head as she desperately tries to process the sudden alliance. Fabiola softly confesses her underlying motives, explaining she simply could not bear to witness an honest person getting hurt by something so cruelly unreasonable. Flustered and completely overwhelmed, the girl marvels at a marquis's daughter desiring her friendship, completely unaware of the intricate web Fabiola is actively weaving. Piercing the air with a razor-sharp gaze, Fabiola is highly praised for possessing a remarkably strong and unyielding sense of justice. Malicious whispers quickly infect the academy as the full, unvarnished story of the incident spreads like wildfire, notably lacking any detailed explanation of the true circumstances. The rampant rumors specifically target and center around a young lady of incredibly high standing, painting her as a volatile and dangerous antagonist. Savage gossip dictates that this noble lady supposedly planned the entire malicious scheme simply because she couldn't stomach seeing poor Sherry talking to her fiancé. Students murmur their deepest sympathies for Sherry, lamenting how she was viciously resented for merely engaging in a perfectly normal conversation with a male classmate. The ruthless escalation of the noble drama finally culminates in a female student being unceremoniously and permanently expelled from the prestigious academy. Fabiola dismisses the ousted rival with a chillingly cold smirk, casually noting that delusional noble ladies are nothing but an absolute pain to deal with. Capitalizing on her newfound social leverage, Fabiola is subsequently invited to the opulent Marquis Ferreira estate as a grand gesture of gratitude for her swift intervention. Approaching the sprawling manor, she trembles slightly with nervous anticipation, admitting she fully expected grandeur but is still entirely blown away by the incredible estate. Stepping inside the lavish home, Sherry beams with absolute radiance, profoundly glad that Fabiola actually honored them by coming to visit. A massive, mouth-watering feast of perfectly roasted meats and lavish sides is dramatically slammed down onto the grand dining table with a heavy thud. The gracious host warmly urges Fabiola to dig right in and not hold back, sincerely hoping the extravagant culinary spread perfectly suits her refined taste. Sherry's imposing yet gentle father leans in with a warm smile, formally noting that his beloved daughter has been in Fabiola's excellent care. Gripping her silverware in sheer panic, Fabiola stammers out a polite denial while internally screaming that her overwhelming nerves are completely killing the incredible flavor of the food. Ignoring Fabiola's frantic pleas to stop raising the bar, Sherry enthusiastically boasts that everyone in class talks to her now because Fabiola's incredibly quick wit caught the culprit. Sherry's elegant mother teases her daughter's boundless excitement, sincerely thanking Fabiola and begging her to please continue being a good friend to her child. The father chuckles affectionately as Sherry groans in embarrassment, proudly stating that his daughter is a genuinely kind girl who perfectly inherited his strong-willed face. Fabiola quietly gazes at the warm, beaming faces of the Ferreira family, deeply struck by the genuine, unfiltered affection radiating brilliantly between them. Watching them get along so effortlessly, Fabiola softly and wistfully realizes that this beautiful harmony must be exactly what a real family is actually like. Suddenly, a sharp realization strikes Fabiola like a physical blow, her eyes snapping wide open in absolute horror as a chilling thought pierces her comfortable illusion. Completely oblivious to the internal crisis, a carefree Sherry laughs heartily, blissfully declaring that life is going to be incredibly fun from now on. A dark, suffocating shadow falls over Fabiola's racing mind as she grimly remembers that her younger sister, Juliana, will be officially entering the academy next year. Snapping violently back to reality, Fabiola desperately reassures the concerned mother that the food is quite delicious, hastily masking her mounting internal panic. Forcing a bright, painfully strained smile, Fabiola firmly reminds herself that she desperately needs to enjoy this wonderfully special day while it lasts. Sherry excitedly chatters away, marveling at what a massive, unbelievable coincidence it is that Candy, Natalie, and Betty all ended up in the exact same class. Recalling her initial crippling school anxiety, Sherry glows with joy, confessing that being with her amazing friends makes every single day unbelievably fun. The narrative violently shifts to the present timeline as Juliana repeatedly and urgently begs her older sister to please just listen to her. With a sharp, resentful glare cutting through the tension, Fabiola silently and bitterly acknowledges that her younger sister Juliana has finally enrolled. Juliana brightly suggests they go to school together, only to have her eager hopes instantly crushed when her older sister apologetically declines yet again. Pouting in deep frustration, Juliana fiercely complains that they haven't gone to school together a single time because her sister gets asked to do way too much. Fabiola quickly deflects the persistent invitation, citing some incredibly urgent documents a teacher requested that absolutely must be delivered first thing in the morning. Ignoring Juliana's continued whines, Fabiola abruptly heads out first, internally trying to desperately convince herself that the girl probably harbors no ill intent. A venomous, all-consuming jealousy flares within Fabiola as she glares back, bitterly noting how Juliana easily steals everything just by being near her. Gritting her teeth in sheer frustration, Fabiola deeply laments that her carefully constructed, peaceful school life was finally going so perfectly well before this intrusion. The story swiftly introduces Sist, the boisterous mood maker of the class and second son of Viscount Walker, widely popular with all the girls for his rugged looks. Yawning widely with utter disregard for decorum, Sist makes his casual entrance, noted as a male student Fabiola actually became good friends with during her third year. Having easily bonded over a shared textbook, the two comfortably talk without any reservation since they both hail from closely ranked Viscount families. Fabiola greets him with a genuinely bright, instantly relaxed smile, welcoming her chaotic friend with a cheerful good morning. She playfully scolds him for cutting it incredibly close to the bell again, to which he lazily replies that making it in time is totally fine to avoid a scolding. Rubbing his exhausted eyes, Sist casually excuses his terrible posture by explaining he stayed up way too late fiercely talking with friends. Fabiola leans in with genuine slight concern, noting his overwhelmingly sleepy appearance and directly asking if he is actually okay. Flashing a charming, highly confident wink, Sist teases that despite her harsh scolding, she'll definitely wake him up before the teacher ever notices. Blushing slightly, Fabiola stubbornly insists she absolutely won't help if he foolishly dozes off and makes the teacher furiously mad, though she mutters that it's fine as long as that's all it is. Bursting into loud, booming laughter, Sist slaps her back so incredibly hard that she visibly recoils and yells out in a sharp burst of pain. Unapologetic and grinning from ear to ear, Sist delivers another brutal backslap, shamelessly declaring that he's completely counting on Fabiola-chan to save him. Eyes squeezed shut and face flushed with irritation, Fabi bluntly declares that using the chan honorific is completely creepy. Unfazed by her sudden outburst, he leans in with a playful smile and asks if they aren't already best buds. Gently patting her head with affectionate ease, he flashes a teasing grin and casually tells her not to get so mad. A soft, beautifully genuine smile curves across her lips as his comforting gesture easily melts away her lingering frustration. Her large eyes widen slightly with a bright, blushing warmth as she completely surrenders to the wonderfully sweet moment. Snapping abruptly back to reality, Fabi shoots a sharp, panicked glance toward the heavy classroom doors. Mentally praising the teacher's incredibly timely arrival, she desperately tries to hide her fiercely blushing face from the rest of the bustling class. Staring blankly ahead with a quiet, undeniable realization, Fabi bitterly admits to herself that she has foolishly fallen in love all over again. Utterly oblivious to her internal panic, he continues to beam at her with an effortlessly charming and handsome expression. Smiling radiantly in her stylish, star-patterned academy uniform, Fabi joyfully reflects on how incredibly fun every single day has suddenly become. However, her hard-earned peace is constantly shattered by her older sister whining about strict mother-in-law guidance and young Juliana relentlessly clinging to her for cute, limited-edition items. Back at her lavish estate, chaos reigns absolute as Fabi is relentlessly dragged into sorting her father's misplaced work documents and frantically running her mother's tedious tea party errands. Clutching her chest with a deeply serene smile, she finds immense solace in her fulfilling academy life, cherishing the good friends that make her feel truly at home despite her lingering, exhausting headaches. Glancing sideways with a profound, emotional weight shining in her bright eyes, she quietly acknowledges the absolute most important reason of all. Breaking her intense train of thought, he gently calls her name and cheerfully suggests they finally head down to the cafeteria for a well-deserved lunch. Walking slowly past the ornate, sunlit windows, Fabi nervously realizes this is the very first time they are eating lunch completely alone together. Her racing heart soars with giddy, uncontrollable excitement as she triumphantly celebrates the fact that he actively and willingly invited her out today. Stepping gracefully down the grand, sun-drenched hallway, the two students walk shoulder to shoulder in a comfortable, deeply intimate silence. Sneaking a wildly fond glance at his profile, Fabi blushes deeply as her frantically pounding heart reacts to the simple, profound thrill of walking by his side. Stretching his arms with a heavy, bittersweet sigh, He notes how fast their 3 years flew by and softly laments that he won't be able to see Fabiola after graduation either. A heavy, somber shadow immediately falls over Fabi's widened eyes at the incredibly painful reminder that their inevitable parting is approaching so rapidly. Looking up at him with a soft, deeply melancholy gaze, she quietly and vulnerably agrees that the upcoming separation truly is a lonely thought. He stops dead in his tracks and turns to her in genuine, breathtaking surprise, his eyes widening slightly at her unexpectedly honest confession. Gripping her uniform collar tightly to steady her trembling hands, Fabi forces a brave, sweet smile and openly admits she is going to deeply miss these precious moments too. Beneath her quietly melancholic words, a sudden, overwhelming surge of pure, unadulterated happiness radiates fiercely from her bright, expressive eyes. She silently and ecstatically rejoices in the beautiful, undeniable realization that he clearly and genuinely feels the exact same way she does. Profoundly touched by her sweet honesty, Thisti closes his eyes and fully returns her warm sentiment with an incredibly soft, deeply affectionate smile. Laughing brightly to break the heavy tension, Thisti playfully suggests they just repeat a year to continue scheming together, prompting Fabi to laughingly question his completely ridiculous logic. Clutching her starry tie, Fabi beams with an absolutely radiant, infectious joy as their beautifully light-hearted banter easily dispels the previous gloom. Thisti delivers the final, breathtakingly romantic blow by smoothly confessing that simply being with Fabiola is incredibly fun. Eyes squeezed tightly closed in pure, unadulterated bliss, Fabi happily and loudly shouts her enthusiastic agreement to the world. The incredibly cheerful pair finally approach the grand, intricately carved wooden doors of the bustling, noisy academy cafeteria. Through the elegant, leaded glass panes, they can be seen happily grabbing their heavy lunch trays in the beautifully lit dining hall. Sitting down with her hot meal, Fabi internally squeals over how perfectly well they get along, obsessively replaying his sweet, flattering compliment in her spinning head. Resting her fiercely flushed face heavily in her hands, she daydreams blissfully at the empty table while kindly fetches the rest of their delicious food. Snapping herself violently out of the romantic, hazy daze, she mentally scolds her own racing heart for being way too embarrassingly self-conscious. A steaming, incredibly delicious bowl of stew is suddenly placed on the wooden table as he casually and warmly apologizes for keeping her waiting. Staring wide-eyed and hopeful at her incredibly thoughtful companion, Fabi desperately wonders if her intense, burning romantic feelings might actually be perfectly mutual. SYST proudly presents a little bonus dessert, perfectly remembering it's her absolute favorite, and Fabi excitedly thanks him for the incredibly sweet pudding. The perfect, delicately romantic atmosphere is violently shattered when a familiar, piercingly shrill voice suddenly screams for her older sister across the crowded room. Half frozen in sheer, unadulterated shock, Fabi nervously realizes that at this rapidly escalating rate, she might just need to desperately confess her feelings right now. Despite the sudden, utterly terrifying interruption to their date, she warmly reflects on how incredibly well it always manages to look out for her. Fabi stares in absolute, petrified horror as the elegantly dressed Juliana boldly marches over, loudly and obnoxiously remarking on how unusual it is to see her older sister eating in the common cafeteria. Completely trapped at the small table, a terrified Fabi awkwardly glances up at it while the demanding Juliana aggressively looms right beside them. A dark, incredibly menacing shadow falls heavily over Fabi's widened, panicked eye as her full name is slowly and terrifyingly dragged out by her sister. Mentally cursing herself for foolishly letting her guard down, Fabi realizes in sheer, sinking dread that merely avoiding the designated first-year spots was nowhere near enough to hide. Blinking in mild, perfectly polite confusion, he turns to the sudden intruder and smoothly asks who this lovely, energetic young lady is. Startled by his incredibly dashing appearance, Juliana quickly introduces herself, while a thoroughly defeated Fabi flatly confirms that this is indeed her chaotic younger sister. Flashing a breathtakingly handsome, completely disarming smile, he formally and politely introduces himself as A.Z. Walker to the new arrival. To Fabi's utter, soul-crushing despair, the blissfully oblivious SST cheerfully invites Juliana to sit down and join their once private, romantic lunch date. A tightly clenched fist trembles violently with a barely contained, turbulent emotion, showcasing a silent but overwhelmingly powerful surge of pure, unadulterated tension rapidly sweeping through the heavy atmosphere. Breaking the incredibly suffocating silence, Juliana cheerfully and eagerly announces she will go grab some food, desperately seeking her older sister's casual approval to escape the immediate tension. Overjoyed by the apparent, easy permission, Juliana beams brightly and loudly asks if it is truly okay, her high-pitched voice ringing with a genuine, bubbling happiness that fills the room. Suddenly, a sharp, metallic clang violently pierces the air, instantly drawing Sist's acute, highly focused attention toward the completely unexpected and startling disturbance. A haunting, distinctively familiar bell sound echoes ominously through the grand corridor, triggering a profound and terrifying realization within Fabiola that she has definitely heard this exact, dreadful chime long ago. Without a single agonizing moment of hesitation, desperate footsteps shatter the calm quiet as someone violently sprints down the long hallway, desperately attempting to escape the rapidly unfolding, disastrous scene. Grappling with a sickening, overwhelming sense of déjà vu, Fabiola frantically wonders where her fleeting, precious happiness vanished to, deeply unsettled by how the devastating, life-altering shift happened in a mere, terrifying instant. Watching Juliana and Sist share a sickeningly warm, highly intimate smile, Fabiola's heavy heart plummets as she desperately and foolishly prays that this time, surely, things will be completely different. A crushing, profoundly bitter realization washes over her as she painfully notes how things constantly slip from her own desperate hands directly into Juliana's, specifically because her sister always aggressively claims to love whatever she loves. Desperately suppressing the incredibly hot, threatening tears that would inevitably spill if she relaxed her iron guard even slightly, Fabiola simply waits for the torturous time to pass in numb agony, completely failing to register a single word of her afternoon classes. The deeply torturous, suffocating silence of the afternoon is abruptly broken when Sist casually approaches her after school, smoothly asking if she happens to have a brief minute to spare. Acknowledging that it is incredibly strange to ask this heavily loaded question so quickly, Sist nervously initiates a serious conversation while Fabiola hesitates, sharply reminding him that she is just about to head home. Turning back with an incredibly stiff, highly guarded posture, Fabiola glares defensively over her tense shoulder, mentally and physically bracing herself for the inevitable, heartbreaking blow she knows is rapidly approaching. Staring intently with a profound, uncharacteristic seriousness, Sist nervously questions if Juliana currently has a boyfriend or a fiancé, striking a completely lethal, devastating blow to Fabiola's fragile, lingering hopes. Fabiola coldly and mechanically confirms that her sister is unattached, prompting an eager Sist to shamelessly confess he fell for Juliana at first sight, while Fabiola desperately double-checks his blinding certainty. Completely and thoroughly enchanted, Sist breathlessly admits he simply cannot get Juliana's radiant, perfect smile out of his head, swearing passionately that he has never felt this intensely about anyone before in his entire life. Masking her agonizing, catastrophic internal bleeding, Fabiola silently observes his incredibly love-struck expression, painfully realizing that he is actually capable of making such a wonderfully tender, open face. Desperately wanting to strictly prove the sheer, uncompromising magnitude of his absolute seriousness, Sist solemnly vows to exclusively cherish Juliana from this pivotal moment onward. Maintaining a perfectly stoic, completely unbreakable facade, Fabiola pragmatically dictates that once he entirely cuts all his previous romantic ties, she will properly and officially introduce him to her beloved sister. Pledging to completely and permanently sever ties with every other woman, Sist begs for Fabiola's crucial help, leaving her to sardonically question if it was really okay for him to casually reveal his scandalous, extensive entanglements to her. In a powerful, highly misguided gesture of unwavering camaraderie, he tightly clasps her hands, selfishly oblivious to the devastating, absolute emotional ruin he is currently inflicting upon his fiercely supportive friend. Overflowing with a blinding, incredibly ignorant joy, Sist loudly and enthusiastically thanks Fabiola for her vital, life-changing assistance in securely establishing his new, passionate romance. Fabiola quietly lowers her gaze, her beautiful eyes entirely clouded with a dark, suffocating mixture of profound grief and simmering, deeply ingrained resentment that threatens to completely consume her. Whirling around with a boundless, highly infectious energy, Sist bids her a remarkably cheerful farewell, eagerly promising to see her tomorrow as he sprints off toward his bright, newly secured future. Clutching her heavy schoolbag defensively against her chest, Fabiola numbly reflects that normally, just having him briefly hold her hand would make her fragile heart leap, and yet she currently feels nothing but a cold, expanding despair. Breaking down into incredibly ugly, wretched sobs, Fabiola cries uncontrollably as she bitterly concedes that it is entirely over for her once again, despite desperately knowing in her heart that she still deeply loves him. Choking on her own incredibly painful tears, she groans in absolute, unadulterated misery, agonizing over how, just a few short hours ago, she had foolishly fantasized that her profound, desperate love was actually mutual. Looking back on their historically shared, precious history, she deeply mourns how she originally met Lord Sist and painstakingly nurtured her delicate, genuine feelings for him over a long, highly meaningful period of time. Unable to stop the violently cascading tears of pure, unyielding frustration even after returning to the quiet safety of her home, Fabiola finally reaches an incredibly firm, life-altering decision. Staring blankly into the cold, empty void, she coldly internalizes the devastating, completely humiliating reality that she has now been thoroughly and painfully rejected twice. Reflecting highly analytically on her incredibly flawed family dynamic, she notes her parents possess absolutely no social skills, though they curiously run a highly successful clothing business with exceptional taste. Solidifying her desperate, highly calculated escape plan in the stifling darkness, Fabiola makes the ultimate, unwavering resolution to completely and permanently leave her toxic, deeply unfulfilling home. Calculating the incredibly massive political advantages, she reasons that marrying Juliana and inheriting a prestigious title will be plenty attractive for Sist, ultimately allowing him to seamlessly take over the family so she can finally be free. Hardening her deeply wounded, completely shattered heart, Fabiola justifies her incredibly calculated manipulation, grimly deciding that this small amount of personal retaliation ought to be completely forgiven by the universe. Casting aside her lifelong, incredibly suffocating role as the endlessly supportive older sister, Fabiola vehemently declares that she is finally going to try living entirely for herself from now on. Wasting absolutely no precious time, she actively sets her grand escape into motion, systematically preparing the necessary paperwork and officially submitting her strict application for the academy dormitory. Steeling her rapidly fraying nerves, Fabiola politely excuses herself as she enters her father's imposing study, fully knowing that all that is left is to successfully ask him to officially sign the critical documents. Flashing back to her incredibly meticulous preparations, she strategically recalls going directly to the career office first in order to swiftly secure a highly essential recommendation letter for her departure. Presenting the crucial papers, she calmly explains they are documents regarding her upcoming graduation, easily bypassing her highly distracted father who complains he is entirely too busy with concepts for his new work to care about academy forms. Standing rigidly tense by the large, imposing desk, Fabiola watches him handle the quill, internally paralyzed by the terrifying worry that the detailed documents might accidentally expose her massive secret plan to abandon the home. A cold, intensely familiar wave of disappointment washes over her as he hastily signs the papers without even bothering to read them, definitively proving that, as always, he remains utterly and hopelessly indifferent to her existence. Reflecting on the swift, incredibly precise execution of her matchmaking plot, Fabiola notes that bringing them together was the absolute easy part, as Juliana eagerly started coming over after merely having lunch with Sist a few times. When a slightly flustered, hesitant Juliana tentatively addresses her older sister, Fabiola perfectly understands the unspoken cue, realizing that all that is truly left to do is to conveniently leave the two young lovers completely alone. Supremely confident in her masterful machinations, Fabiola fully knew Sist would handle things exceptionally well, which is quickly proven when a blushing Juliana shyly confesses that she seems to have completely fallen for Lord Sist. Feigning gentle, highly convincing innocence to maintain her perfect, supportive facade, Fabiola turns to her younger sister with a soft smile and calmly asks what the pressing matter is. Gently grasping Juliana's trembling, highly anxious hands, Fabiola asks why she sounds so painfully apologetic about falling in love, expertly dodging Juliana's guilty realization that her older sister also had deep feelings for him. Flashing a remarkably convincing, deeply reassuring smile, Fabiola strictly commands Juliana not to worry about her at all, confidently insisting that Sist surely feels the exact same passionate way about her. Instantly relieved and practically glowing with immense, unfiltered joy, Juliana happily accepts the grand blessing, eagerly stating that she looks forward to navigating this exciting, newly forged future together. The incredibly lucrative, highly beneficial arrangement proceeds flawlessly as the Viscount Walkerhouse sees absolutely nothing but massive political benefits in their second son marrying in, eagerly agreeing to the highly dependable son-in-law at once. With her incredibly heavy familial burdens finally lifted and the succession securely cemented, a calm, highly detached voice notes that the newly liberated Fabiola ought to finally go out and find her own worthy companion as well. Fabiola smoothly agrees with her father's traditional role in finding marriage partners while slyly pointing out that she secured both connections herself. Declaring her bold new intentions without an ounce of hesitation, she firmly announces her plan to venture out into the world to find a partner of her own choosing. Her father's eyes widen in absolute, sweating shock as the sheer audacity of her unexpected rebellion finally registers. Utterly bewildered by the sudden shift, Juliana gasps and confusedly questions if Fabiola was supposed to simply help with the family business after graduation. Ignoring the shocked gasps echoing in the room, Fabiola drops another massive bombshell by firmly stating she will leave the house immediately after graduating. Staring straight ahead with razor-sharp resolve, she reveals she has already secured a position as a palace maid and will live in the dorms since her father completely neglected her future. Covering her mouth in a display of feigned, utterly insincere surprise, Juliana maliciously marvels at the fact that her older sister is actually leaving home. Dropping her innocent act entirely, Juliana's eyes darken with greedy disappointment as she silently laments losing the chance to steal even more from Fabiola. Quickly rationalizing the departure, Juliana smugly decides an unmarried older sister would just be a nuisance anyway once Sis marries her and moves in. She maliciously concludes she can simply visit and leech off Fabiola whenever she needs something, ultimately deciding not to complain since she snagged a wonderful fiancé. Dismissing herself with a sharp, incredibly formal farewell, Fabiola turns her back on her stunned family and strides away. Her father finally snaps out of his stupor and belatedly cries out for her to wait, but his weak protests fall completely on deaf ears. Stepping out into the bright daylight, a completely liberated Fabiola throws her arm up in absolute triumph, enthusiastically declaring her long-awaited freedom. Gazing up at the open sky with a genuinely peaceful, unburdened smile, she fully embraces the crisp breeze as she officially welcomes her brand new life. She basks in the profoundly quiet comfort of finally escaping her toxic environment, deeply relieved to no longer be at the complete mercy of her family's whims.